Hello and good evening, everyone. My name's Louise Regan. I'm Vice Chair of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and I'm very pleased to be chairing this event tonight, Imprisoning a Generation. We are really privileged to be joined by Zelda Edmunds, who's the director, and I'll introduce shortly, and also Shaina, who's from DCI, Defence for Children International Palestine, and again, I'll introduce her a little later on. Just a reminder, as always with our online events, please do abide by our code of conduct. We expect people to behave respectfully and to abide by our, our general principles of that. So please do treat people with respect in anything you're posting or saying in the chat function. So just to introduce Zelda now. So Zelda is the director and producer of this film, Imprisoning a Generation, and she is going to introduce the film to us. She lived in Palestine for 2 years. She's currently based in Detroit, and I'm really looking forward to watching the film. I won't say too much more now. I will talk a little bit later about the situation, but I would like to hand over to Zelda so that we can start watching the film. We will then move into watching the film. This is a slightly different platform to what we usually use, so you won't be able to see other people, but you will be able to ask questions in the chat function later on. So please, if you think of questions when Zelda talks or during the film, please do post those questions, and we are going to have a Q&A session later on. So I'll hand over to you, Zelda. Thanks so much. I'm really looking forward to seeing the film.
Great, thanks so much. Thanks to Palestine Solidarity Campaign for creating space for this conversation. I'd like to introduce the film by sharing how it ended up getting made, because I think it's useful context. So I returned to Palestine in 2016 and ended up doing direct action work in Hebron, which you'll see in the film. And in the process of being back in Palestine and doing that, it became clear to me how there had been an increase of targeting of children since I had previously lived in Palestine. And the tactic of targeting children, who are the future of Palestine, right? Any society, any community, children are the future. Targeting children is not a new thing. Israel's been doing that for decades. But I was sort of seeing it in new ways. And so I had a camera with me and I started just documenting, and I started interviewing families on the different ways that kids were being targeted in their communities, in their everyday lives. And in the process of interviewing probably about 6 or 7 young folks and their families, what became really clear was that each of the kids had been detained or arrested, prosecuted, and imprisoned at one point or another. And so that's how the film ended up focusing specifically on that aspect of how young Palestinians are targeted, living under a military occupation. I will leave it at that for now. And I'm so glad that Shaina is here as well from Defence for Children International Palestine, so that we can really have a comprehensive conversation about this difficult topic.
Thanks so much. So hopefully now the film will show, and we will see you all in 50 minutes when it's finished. Thank you. Thank you so much, Zelda. Okay, welcome back everyone, and thank you, Zelda, for that amazingly powerful film. I said I would say a little more after we'd seen the film. I actually am Vice Chair of Palestine Solidarity Campaign, but I'm also a National Officer for the National Education Union. And actually my activism around Palestine started when I heard a speaker from Defence for Children International Palestine speak at one of our conferences. And I have to say it was one of the most powerful speeches I have ever heard. And as an educator, I was shocked by the treatment of Palestinian children. And I've been shocked again tonight to see that, even though I know all of those things, and there were lots of people I knew in that film, Zelda, which was very powerful for me, actually. And I just, before I introduce Shaina again, I just want to just pay tribute to somebody, because you had people from Ida Camp and the Largie Centre in there. And yesterday, the director and founder of the Largie Centre, Salah Ajama, passed away very sadly. And I just want to pay tribute to him. He was a very good friend of mine. And I'm still devastated even now by his loss. I know how much wonderful work he did and how much he will be missed, not only in Palestine, but internationally. So I just want to take a moment just to pay tribute to him and to remember him for the fantastic work that he has done. And I know that his work will carry on through the Largie Centre. So, and also, just for people watching, that we have got a new launch of an EDM, an early day motion, about Israel's treatment of Palestinian children, and I'm sure that will be posted in the chat. And a little reminder to people, we've had a couple of questions in already, really good questions, so I know our speakers are going to be able to talk about that. But if you've got any other questions, please do post those. So Shaina Lowe is from DCI Palestine. She's based in the US. They do fantastic work. This is a fantastic organisation. Our union takes delegations twice a year, although obviously we've had to pause those during COVID, but we take delegations twice a year, and we always meet with DCI Palestine when we're out in Palestine, and it's very powerful what our members hear there. Please do sign up to DCI Palestine and the No Way to Treat a Child campaign. I know you've got a new report coming out, and Shaina may refer to that, and if you sign up to their mailing list, you'll get that early on. But I'm really pleased. Shaina's just going to talk a little bit about their work, and then we'll go straight into a Q&A with Shaina and Zelda. But thank you, everyone. I'm sure you found that film as powerful as I did.
Thanks, Louise. And I'm glad that you mentioned Salah. It was the first note that I made when I saw the Largie Centre to mention him. So I'm glad that you did and paused to pay tribute to him, because he was a friend of mine as well, and a really incredible human being. I want to, before I get started, just thank Zelda again for making this incredible film that really, it's amazing how much information is packed into less than an hour. So I don't want to rehash too much of the information that's presented in the film, because I want to get to the questions, but I just want to give a little bit of background about Defence for Children International Palestine and who we are and what we do, and also just talk about a few of the things that we've been working on that aren't necessarily directly related to child detention, but are raised in the film. So as Louise indicated, Defence for Children International Palestine is a Palestinian human rights organization. We're the only organization that focuses exclusively on children's rights. Despite me being based in the United States, the vast majority of our team of over 40 is based in Palestine, in both the West Bank and Gaza. And we focus on everything from documenting violations of children's rights to providing direct legal representation to Palestinian children who are prosecuted in both, or actually not even both, in the Israeli military court system, Jerusalemite children who are prosecuted in the Israeli civilian court system, and then also Palestinian children who are in conflict with Palestinian law. We also document, rights abuses regarding the right to education, the right to housing, the right to health. So our work goes much broader beyond the military detention work. And then, and we also employ social workers to ensure that we're able to address children's needs in a more comprehensive fashion. In addition to all of the work we do on the accountability side, including documentation, legal representation, and then the advocacy work we do both internationally and locally in the occupied Palestinian territory, we also have an entire branch of the organization that works on empowering youth, working with the Children's Youth Council, training children in knowing their rights, what they should do if they come in contact with either Israeli forces or Palestinian security forces, and then training children actually to become human rights defenders on their own and learn how to document human rights violations themselves. So that's very briefly just a tiny little blurb about what we do. I just want to talk about a couple of issues, both some of which are related to the film and then some of which are related to some of the research that we've produced recently or is soon to be produced. I want to just flag one of the issues that we've documented and been increasingly documenting is the use of solitary confinement against Palestinian children in Israeli military detention. And in places like the United States, and I'm assuming also in the UK, when we think of solitary confinement, we normally think of it being done for two main reasons. One is to protect a vulnerable prisoner from maybe a dangerous general population, or to protect a general population from a dangerous prisoner. What we found is that Palestinian children are being held in isolation without any meaningful human contact for days at a time, merely as a coercive tactic during their interrogation period to put pressure on them to confess. And so in a 5-year period between 2016 and 2020, we documented at least 135 children who were held in solitary confinement. And to me, I've read all of these children's affidavits that they provide to our attorneys. And each time I read them, I'm shocked by the experience that these children are undergoing. Everything from being, put in stress positions so that they're made physically uncomfortable, to being kept for the majority of the day in cells that are stinky, filthy, have protrusions coming out of the walls so the child can't even lean back. Frequently, the children talk about the food being inedible. Lights are on 24 hours a day, and children describe the lighting and also the color of the walls as really being harsh and hurting their eyes. So children are made to be in this position where they're physically uncomfortable, psychologically uncomfortable, and the only relief from that experience is when they're brought into interrogation. Frequently, we find that children who are brought in interrogation, who are put in solitary confinement, that they're frequently told that after a few days they'll be that they're going to be transferred to the general prison, and they'll be told that there will be kind of a transition period where they'll be kept by themselves, and that's when they go into a room that's really kind of a deluxe, what I call deluxe solitary confinement. So the room is not stinky, it might even have a TV, and that's when they're approached by one or two men who tell them that they're part of the prisoners' organization and that they're there to help. And these men earn the trust of the children and ask them to, confess to whatever they may or may not have done. Sometimes children might even embellish what they've done because they want to seem more mature than they actually are. And after spending a few days in this kind of nice environment with these nice, friendly men who are giving them food, maybe cigarettes, that's when they're brought back to their original interrogator and confronted with whatever they told those men. And it's not just the fact that it's a dishonest way of getting a child to confess to something, but I think about the long-term psychological impact that it has on these children and how devastating that is. They're in this incredibly vulnerable position, and to have these men betray them, it's just it's hard to imagine how they can integrate back into society upon their release and be trusting of people in their community. I just want to mention a couple of other things, since I know we're short on time. One is that we saw in the story about Marwan and Hebron, the violence of the settlers. And we this year have seen an increase in settler violence, particularly impacting children. And we documented 4 cases within a 6-week period this year. That was more cases than we documented in all of 2020. And those are all on the Defense for Children International Palestine website. So people should feel free to look at those. But just to know that even though this film was filmed a number of years ago, the situation is ongoing. And also thinking about Marwan and the detention that he faced as a young boy. The age of criminal majority the age that a child can be criminally prosecuted is 12 and up. But we do see that children are frequently detained by Israeli forces. They aren't arrested, they aren't charged with anything, but they may be held by forces and unable to leave for a period of time. Sometimes it's minutes, sometimes it's hours. And there have been 2 cases, one of which we documented, about 2 young boys in Hizma next to Jerusalem, who were detained for a number of hours and actually taken from their neighborhood where they were playing outside on their bicycles and taken to a nearby military base and held until late at night. And there was a second case that got a lot of attention that happened in the South Hebron Hills I think it was near around the villages of Atwani and the Yatta area. So just to know that even though children under 12 may not be put in prisons and prosecuted in military courts, they by no means are immune from being impacted by Israeli forces detaining them and from all of the trauma that goes with that. So I think I'll leave it there because I could talk about this forever, but I'm sure we have a lot of questions. And before I wrap up, I do just want to thank the Palestine Solidarity Committee for hosting this, and also to Louise and the NEU for being our partners and for both bringing delegations, but also supporting our work. So thank you.
No problem, Shaina, and thank you for that. Again, a very powerful contribution. We have had some questions, so I'm going to go straight to questions because I'd like to quite get through all of them if I can. We've had 4 questions. I'll start with the first one, which I think you both will be able to contribute to. So it says, how do we fight and defeat apartheid when the UN lacks the will to do so? And I think this is a really important question and it sort of gets to the heart of it. So I'll go to Zelda first, then I'll come to Shaina, and then I'll say a little bit about what PSC is doing as well around this, because I think it's an important issue. Zelda.
Yeah, great. I'm sure many people who are watching are familiar with the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, and I'd just like to briefly give a very short overview of what that is for people who might not be familiar with it. So in 2005, Palestinian civil society, it was around 170 some Palestinian civil organizations, put out a call to the international community to support boycott, divestment from, and sanctions against Israel until they comply with international human rights laws. And specifically what BDS is calling for is an end to the occupation and dismantling of the wall, equal rights for Palestinians in all of the land, and right of return for Palestinian refugees who have been displaced. And the BDS movement is global and incredibly powerful and growing. And I know that PSC is involved in BDS campaign work. So I'll leave it to you, Louise, to mention that. But that's what I would say is the reality is, you know, what happens on these larger governmental international body platforms is, yes, there's good things that maybe can come from that, but the reality is that we need to be working as communities to put pressure on Israel to have any reason to change what's going on. Because on an international platform, it's not, the pressure isn't mounting to actual change on the ground. Things keep getting worse. So that would be my personal response to that, is we need to look to Palestinian leadership calling for communities to be involved in BDS work.
Brilliant, thanks, Zelda. Shaina.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Zelda. And I think one of the most important parts of BDS work is actually the education aspect of it, because, and I've been working on Palestinian issues for way too long, more than 10 years. And oftentimes I feel like we're speaking to ourselves. And I think finding means of expanding the circle of Palestinian rights activists, BDS is a great tool for doing that, for engaging in other activists, with other activist communities, and raising awareness. The other things that I would say are continuing, even though it oftentimes feels futile, to engage with our elected representatives, because they are meant to represent us. And I think oftentimes here in the US, we get feedback from members of Congress. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I don't hear from you enough. Like, I hear from the opposition so much more. And so even if it feels futile, it's always important, like this EDM has just dropped in the last couple of days. It's important to reach out to your member of parliament and say to them, hey, I want you to sign your name onto this. And if they say, I'm not going to do it, ask for a meeting, ask for an opportunity to talk to them about the issue, find a way to engage with them. And I think the final thing I'll say is that we have seen, even though it's extremely slow, and I think we have a lot of skepticism, there is an opening both in terms of educating our communities, and also in government pressure around the ICC investigation that has been announced as finally being opened. And I think even though many of us are cynical about the efficacy or the political will of these international bodies, we can't abandon them. We have to continue to push. And I think I just saw that Boris Johnson has made a statement in opposition to the investigation of Israel at the ICC. And it's important to push back and to not let his voice be the only voice coming from the UK on this issue.
No, thanks, Shaina. I think that's a really important point. And sometimes we think, oh, what's the point in doing this or that, because they don't listen. But if we don't speak out, nobody speaks out. So we have to continue to raise our voices and advocate for the Palestinian people. And I think that's one of the biggest messages that I have had when I've visited Palestine, is not, it's not about just going and being with them. It's about the fact that we can come back and tell their stories. And, Zelda's done that beautifully in the film. It's a very powerful film, and it's something that should be shared widely. I mean, obviously, PSC supports the BDS call, and we have got actions that our members can take part in. They're all on our website, but we've done quite a lot of work around HSBC. We're also doing quite a lot of work at the moment around the pensions campaign, so the local government pension scheme and divestment, and putting pressure on local councils to divest from that. And people should go onto the website and look at those campaigns, get involved in their local branches, get involved as individuals, and make sure that they're pushing back and raising their voices, because the more we speak out, the more we're making other people aware. And I think sometimes people think you're never going to change people, but that just isn't true. When I became involved in issues around speaking out about Palestine, it was very hard. It's much easier now. It's a much more accepted position. And I also have lots of friends who have moved their position based on the work that I have done in advocating and speaking out and telling the stories. And I think people don't necessarily see that. So please do keep looking on the websites, ours, DCI Palestine to make sure you're sharing. Well, I missed the question, so I'm going to go back to the first question. I do apologize. I'm looking at questions in my chat. So how aware are Israeli citizens of what is happening to Palestinian children? I don't know if either of you have got a view on that. Should we go to Shaina first?
Sure. I mean, it's hard to tell. The Israeli public has moved significantly to the right in the last 20 years. So I think in some respects there's knowledge about it and either apathy or the feeling that Israeli forces actions are justified as a need for maintaining security. That is not to say that there aren't Israelis who are concerned about this. There's actually a group, I'm going to mess up the name, but it's something like Israeli Parents Concerned with Military Detention, something like that. And they do organize events and speak out in Israeli society and try and raise awareness. They were responsible for getting a long feature in Haaretz magazine a couple of years ago that highlighted some of the boys that DCI had worked with and one of our attorneys. And also the other thing to mention is that while I think all of the attorneys employed by DCI now are from the West Bank or including East Jerusalem, there are a number of Israeli attorneys, both Jewish and Palestinian, but with Israeli citizenship, who represent children in the military courts or in the Jerusalem military courts. Michael Sfard is a well-known one, Gabby Lasky. There's Neri Ramadi, who I believe is based in Ireland now, but had represented members of the Tamimi family. So it's not that all Israelis believe that this is right or don't know that it's going on, but there is a very small group of active Israelis who are pushing against it. Unfortunately, I think that there's such a small minority in their society that they don't really have the ability to make much change. Also, the Israeli government has taken steps to really prevent people concerned with Palestinian human rights from, for example, accessing Israeli schools and speaking to children. So while Israeli children are recruited by and have military recruiters in their schools, Breaking the Silence, which is an organization of Israeli soldiers and ex-soldiers who talk about the terrible things that they committed, terrible acts that they committed in the occupied territory, they are banned. And so the society has become much more repressive in really stifling those voices from being heard. I don't know, Zelda, if you'd like to add anything.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind to add is just that, most Israelis go through the military. And so since it's required. And so, it's interesting because it's on one hand, it's like, I think most people have a sense, right? And not everyone is on the front lines out in communities doing it when they're in the military, but a lot of people are. But one interesting thing that Sahar Vardia, an Israeli activist and organizer, shared with at a thing I saw a couple years ago that's really stuck with me is that the young folks who are in the Israeli military now were born post-OSLO. They were born post-OSLO Accords, right? And then shortly after that, now the building of the wall starting in 2002. And so while there's always been this like separateness and this otherness that just exists in the fabric of Israeli society around Palestinians, and likewise backwards, vice versa too, right? There's this very physical barrier separating people that wasn't there previously. But now the young folks who are in military have all grown up in a society where there's been that very physical barrier in addition to all the other barriers. And I think that's interesting too, when we just think about the way in which, there's an othering that takes place.
No, yeah, I think that's very important. Actually, that sort of follows on nicely to another question. So another question that's coming is, to what extent did the Oslo process contribute to this reality by covering crimes with the illusion of a peace process? And I think that sort of follows on really quite nicely from what you've just said, Zelda. So Do you want to comment on that, Zelda, and then we'll go to Shaina?
Sure. Yeah. Shaina, I hope you have a really great answer to this. I'm just going to go off the cuff here. That's a good and big and important question. But, you know, I think that it's interesting because I think anyone who's spent a lot of time in Palestine has probably noticed that the stuff that happens on the like peace processes or the conversations that are happening on this like international level, that's not what Palestinians spend a bunch of time talking about. It's like, it feels like it's this like heady, disconnected thing in a way. So that's one thing. But Oslo, you know, out of Oslo came what you saw in the film, how the West Bank got split into area A, B, and C, right? And that was intended to be this temporary transition, right, of figuring stuff out. And it's become this permanent, legalized, it's internationally illegal, but legalized ongoing colonization under the way in which the Israeli government operates. And so I think that, you know, that's an example where it's just like peace processes, what does that actually mean in a tangible way? And Palestinians don't see the results of peace processes, you know, in any direction that leads towards justice. That's been what I've heard and seen. I'm not Palestinian, but that's what I feel like I'm hearing from folks.
Thanks, Zelda. Shaina.
Yeah, I think just following up on what Zelda was saying, I think that actually what the Oslo process has done is it's created an excuse for leaders to avoid taking action to end these practices, because they're told that if they penalize Israel, it'll disrupt the peace process. But there is no peace process, so it's the sham. And I think some of the work that we've been doing through our No Way to Treat a Child campaign, both in the US, in the UK, and in Canada, has been trying to really refocus the situation from being one that's about, you know, some type of political solution that may or may not ever be achieved, or to one that's really focused on human rights and the realization of human rights, regardless of where some peace process might be going. You know, children shouldn't be prosecuted in military courts, period. And whether or not that impacts an Oslo process or a peace process just seems crazy to me, because it's illegal to be doing this. Civilians, especially children, should never be tried in these types of courts and should never be subjected to prohibition under subject to torture. Torture is absolutely prohibited under international law under any circumstance. And so I think what's happened is that the Oslo process, which I don't think really exists at all anymore, has been used as kind of this shield to protect Israel from due criticism over its human rights violations. And I think part of our challenge in the work that we are doing and the work as a movement, not just we as DCI or as the No Way to Treat a Child campaign, but is refocusing after 30 years of talking about two-state solutions and saying, hey, let's put that aside for a minute and let's just focus on making sure that everyone's rights are being respected.
Brilliant. Thanks, Shaina. Right, I'm aware of time, so I've got a question that's directed at you, Shaina, which I'm going to take, and then I've got a couple of questions to sum up with you, Zelda. So your question, Shaina, is can you say something about attacks that have happened on DCI Palestine and attempts to silence you by the likes of UK lawyers for Israel and others? So do you just want to say a little bit about that? Then I'll come to Zelda. Just a reminder to people, the early day motion has been posted in the chat. I think James may be posting it again, but please do sign the early day motion. Please do share it widely as well. The more people we get to sign it, the better. Shaina.
Yeah. So, I mean, as you mentioned, there are attacks on DCI Palestine. They are not true. And one of the things that I think, I'm not even going to address kind of the scope of these attacks because I don't think that they're worth repeating. People can go and Google and look up on UK Lawyers for Israel or NGO Monitor and see the types of things that are said about us. But for folks who might be confronted with those critiques or slurs against DCI, they aren't even critiques. The important thing to recognize is that, Defense for Children International Palestine, one, is part of an international movement that has national sections all around the world. And there's no way that an international children's rights movement would be associating with an organization that does the types of things that we are accused of doing. We also are a major partner and share data frequently, with UN agencies and other international organizations. And so, and our data has been included in, United States State Department human rights reports. The US State Department isn't necessarily the most friendly towards Palestinians, but our data and the information that we collect is credible. The other thing that I just want to say is that we're never attacked on the veracity of our allegations. We're always attacked based on other things, who's a member of our organization or who has worked with us. And I think it's important to know that the work that we're doing at DCI is well documented, not just by us, but by international organizations, Israeli human rights organizations, and the like. And so we also have a statement on our website. I think it's actually still on our homepage, responding to the UK lawyer with an update about the UK Lawyers for Israel issue in particular. But this is all meant to be a distraction. And it's a tactic that is being used not just against Defense for Children International Palestine, but against a huge plethora of Palestinian organizations and Palestinian solidarity organizations. And the idea is that if they throw enough mud at us, we're going to spend all of our time cleaning ourselves off and defending our own reputations rather than defending the rights of Palestinian children or uplifting their stories and the violations being done against them. And so that's what we always have to remember when we're hearing these things. It's not that they're refuting and saying, no, Israel doesn't prosecute 500 to 700 children in military courts that don't meet international standards for fairness and impartiality, independence and impartiality. It's that they're saying these people are evil people, and it's just not even worth in many ways our time, because it distracts from the main issues that we're trying to overcome.
Thanks, Shaina, and I'm absolutely with you. Sometimes people come and attack us and we have to wear it as a badge of honor, because we have to just keep speaking out and doing the right thing. That's what we say in our union, and you're doing that, and we'll carry on doing that with you. So over to you, Zelda. There's two questions, but I'll just give you both of them because I'm aware we're running out of time. First question is around, do you have any update on the 4 children featured since the film was made? And the second question, which is a very important question, is how can people buy and share the film? Because I think lots of people that have watched it, and that's me included, are thinking, how can I get access to this so that I can make sure I'm sharing it and setting up an event locally? So how can we do that? Thanks, Zelda.
Great, thanks. So on the families, I keep pretty casually in touch with them. I'm more closely in touch with 2 of the families, and I don't want to share much detail because it doesn't feel like it's my place to do that. But I will say that, after going through such intense, traumatizing situations as a kid, like that's something that impacts folks for the rest of their lives, and that looks really different for everyone. I will say that Shadi's mom, who you saw at the end, Farihan, I'll call her Shadi, she continues to do a lot of advocacy work and speaking out around all, incarceration and both for children and adults that's happening against Palestinians. So, and as far as if people want to access the film further, I just a couple months ago made it rentable online. If you go to imprisoningageneration.com, you can get to the link to bring you to rent it online. And I am still working with groups for doing screenings and whatnot to have these kinds of conversations. So if folks go to the website, imprisoningageneration.com, on there you can get my email and connect to organize a screening. And DCIP is often, and No Way to Treat a Child folks, often speaking up to speak at these as well, because I'm happy to share whatever information I can, but I am not an expert on this topic. So I'm always grateful for you all sharing that such important context and advocacy work that you are doing on this topic. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Zelda. That's really important. And I'm sure you'll be taking up a lot on that offer from the people that are watching. I want to thank both of you. It has been a really powerful evening. Just a couple of things to sum up, really. Obviously, we encourage people to join Palestine Solidarity Campaign if they're not already a member. Donate if you can. As I've said already, sign up to DCI Palestine. Go onto the website and look at Zelda's film and make sure you get a screening set up in your local area. PSC has a Stand Up for Palestine fundraiser coming up on Tuesday, the 20th of April. Great lineup of comedians. I'm sure the link will be posted in the chat. And I'll sort of end with this. You know, I thought Noran spoke really well, and I just want you all to remember her words. And what I remember from my visits to Palestine is that, you know, this has been a really emotional evening, very powerful, and I'm sure people were upset by some of the images, but Palestinians don't need our tears, they need our words, they need our voices, and that's what our job is now. Our job from here is to go out and be advocates and to speak on their behalf and to keep speaking out. No matter how much people try to silence us, our job is to speak out for justice and freedom for the Palestinian people. That's what I'll continue to do, and I know that's what you will continue to do. But I want to really thank Zelda and Shaina. It's been a really powerful evening. I've really enjoyed it. And thank you both so much for your contributions. Thank you to Palestine Solidarity Campaign, as always, for organising this. And I'm sure we'll see you all very soon. Take care.